Welcome back. With this lecture, we continue our study of historical theology in the Middle Ages. And in this particular video, we're going to be looking at the Great Schism, or Schism, as some people call it. And as we're going to see, this is pertinent to the subject of historical theology for a couple of different reasons. And so let's get to it. The Great Schism, or Schism, is at once an historical development, a series of theological and doctrinal differences between the East and the West, and an ecclesiastical power struggle. First, let's look at the historical development. The Roman Empire had been politically divided into East and West before Constantine. Under the reign of Diocletian, he shared power at first with Maximian, and then with their sons, Galerius and Constantius. So this is a period at the end of the 3rd century called the Tetrarchy. Well, what was going on there was that after Diocletian had sort of recognized that he wasn't able to sort of rule over everything, he took up residence over in the east side, appointed Maximian, and then they appointed their sons, and basically it was a way to sort of subdivide the authority so they could try and run the empire a little bit more efficiently. The problem with this was when you got this many people who think that they are the successors to the emperor, you're going to have a problem, and a number of succession crises led to Constantine, we've already seen this, who is Constantius' son, defeating Maxentius, who was Maximian's son, at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, and we've already talked about that in a previous lecture. Constantine then moved the imperial government of the empire from Rome to a city in the east, Byzantium. So he just made official what had already been semi-official under Diocletian. The final split happened after the death of Theodosius I in 395 AD. However, the cultural division was long-standing. The West spoke and wrote in Latin, didn't have the same ancient cultural heritage of Greece, was economically not as developed as the East. The East had the Greek heritage in language, as well as the culture that went along with that, especially philosophy, and it had a better economic situation. And the East had done a better job and continued to do a better job for many years of resisting the barbarians. We saw that in our lectures on Augustine, how the barbarians had sacked Rome in 410. That never happened, at least not during this era over in the East. So the main power centers on the two sides were simply too far removed from each other. The theological and doctrinal differences. One of the main issues was the aforementioned filioque, which we've seen several times. Theologians in the West were drawn to the filioque because it reflected their understanding of the Trinity, which had been inherited from Augustine, as we've seen. They believe the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. In 598, at the Council of Toledo, the Western Church officially adopted the phrase. They'd been using it all along, and amended the Nicene Creed accordingly. Again, they'd been doing it that way for a long time, but they just did that officially. So since 598 AD, the churches in the West have said the extra Latin word when reciting the Creed. Christ's teaching in John 16:7 offers a biblical warrant for that phrase, and the Son. However, the Eastern churches never really appreciated those arguments, and I think mostly it was because they weren't consulted when that particular addition was put in, and so they simply rejected it. Also, while the roots of the divide between the East and the West lie in the issues of language and culture, as we've seen, the divorce between Rome and Constantinople seems to have become inevitable once one particular theologian became the standard and norm for the theological thought in the West, and that was namely Augustine. We've already talked extensively about Augustine and his role in historical theology, particularly Western theology. We noted that Augustine didn't speak or read in Greek. He read the Bible and early church fathers in rather poor Latin translations. And so his thought was steeped in the Latin tradition of the West, and he lived his whole life within the sphere and influence of Rome. And again, there's subtleties of theological thought that you have to have a facility with the Greek language and read even the Bible in Greek, or these other scholars in Greek, to appreciate them, and vice versa. The East never read anything, or very seldom read anything, that had been written in the Latin West, and that was true of everything from Tertullian's writings up through and including Augustine's writings. And so it was just, they weren't reading each other, and they weren't appreciating the theological development on each side. The theological and doctrinal differences, again, extended to these two traditions. And each side, East and West, considered itself the continuation of the apostles and what was there in Scripture from the day, what the church taught from the day of Pentecost on. So each one considers the other a schism away from the true, holy, and Catholic and Orthodox Church, rather. So another issue, too, is that variants of Arianism lingered in the East even longer. So we've seen that controversy between Arianism and Nicene Orthodoxy, and it was pretty clear that in the West, Nicene Creed was accepted more firmly. In the West, rather, the Nicene Creed was accepted more firmly. In the East, there were still ideas of Arianism that reinterpreted, if you will, how the Nicene Creed was read. A number of petty matters as well differed. The date for Easter observance was different in the East and West. The use of icons in the East, they used icons. In the West, they did not. The Western Church, I think, again, influenced a great deal by Augustine, adopted clerical celibacy. But in the East, priests could marry. So Western clergymen could choose to shave or not shave as they choose. The Eastern clerics could not shave. So that's, again, might seem pretty silly, but in that era, such differences were pretty heartfelt. The third issue that contributed to the schism is the ecclesiastical power struggle. We've already alluded to this as well. The church from the 4th century onwards had 5 patriarchs or head. Each one governed a jurisdictional area or patriarchate. The patriarchs were located in the West in Rome, and they spoke Latin. But then you notice this, in the East, Antioch, Alexandria, Jerusalem, and Byzantium all spoke Greek. So the bishops of Rome considered themselves above everybody else. They weren't calling themselves popes just yet, but that's what they thought. Because Paul and Peter had both been associated with the church in Rome, and they thought, and had been martyred there, so they thought that that was the first church of Rome, or first church of Christendom, rather. Westerners were increasingly irritated by the Easterners' refusal to accept the total authority of the Pope or the Bishop of Rome. So because of this, in the West, the collapse of the empire had led to the church to become more centrally organized under the Pope. In other words, we've already seen this too. When the barbarians invaded Rome, it was Pope Leo that went out to sort of talk to them and negotiate some kind of way to move forward and without them destroying the city. The Pope became a civil authority and had political powers. In the East, the supreme figurehead of the church was the Byzantine emperor, so it was kind of reversed. In the West, a church leader became the political power. In the East, the political power had a lot of authority over the church. The emperor came to have great ecclesiastical authority in the church. Ultimate authority in the West lay with the Pope. In the East, it lay with the 7 great councils. And although the Bishop of Constantinople was regarded as an important ecclesiastical figure, he was first among equals. You could see again, in the West, Rome had been the one patriarchate. In the East, there had been 4 patriarchates or areas of influence. And so, in a sense, as this author suggests, the Western Church was something of a monarchy, and the Eastern Church was something of a republic. The final event happened in 1054 AD. And as I note there, it was somewhat a comic event. That's when the official split happened, when the patriarchs of Rome and Constantinople both excommunicated one another. What happened there was that Pope Leo sent messengers to Constantinople. It was really, again, ostensibly over whether or not they were going to use unleavened bread in the Eucharist. Again, another really seemingly very petty sort of issue. But when Leo IX, when Leo IX sent messengers to the Hagia Sophia, the most important church in Constantinople, in order to either get them to sign off on the filioque and the use of unleavened bread, the East said no, we're not going to do that, and so there was actually a fist fight between the representatives of Pope Leo IX and also the representatives of the Church of Hagia Sophia, and so basically that led to nothing except each side then officially excommunicated the other side. Michael Cerullius, Patriarch of Constantinople, countered by convening a council of bishops that condemned Pope Leo IX and his church, and among the reasons was the filioque clause that we've mentioned. Western Church, he argued, had overstepped its bounds when it amended the Nicene Creed, and the addition of the filioque became a convenient hook upon which to hang all the contention and disagreement between the churches. So, in return, on July the 16th, 1054, the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, as the Nicene puts it, split, and then there were two. What is the lasting effect? Well, after 1054, really the breach was never really healed. From that time on, at least for nearly a millennium, there had been two major branches of Christianity: the Eastern so-called Orthodox Church and the Western Church, first Roman Catholic, and then that divided during the time of the Reformation, as we will see. So these are the two great traditions that came out of the great Schism. These mutual excommunications by the Pope and Patriarch in 1054 became the watershed of history. Moving much further into the future, the excommunications were not lifted until 1965, when Pope Paul VI and Patriarch Athenagoras I followed their historic meeting in Jerusalem, which happened in the year before in 1964, and presided over simultaneous ceremonies that revoked the excommunication decrees. So, again, however, this was more an official act. The two churches really continue to act independently, both in the way they do church and the way their rites and ceremonies are conducted, as well as in very significant ways. There's some ongoing differences in terms of their theology. Well, we're going to stop here. As you can see, the next lecture is going to cover the first of the great scholastic scholars of the Middle Ages, Anselm.